Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me first introduce my counterpart in the interview this afternoon, former Polish Foreign Minister and Defense Minister Radek Sikorski. I'm happy that you're here, that you made it. He came from London and goes on to Warsaw, which shows that he's still busy in different universes, and I would like to briefly present you, very briefly. Mr. Sikorski has studied in Oxford philosophy, economics and political science. The professor he worked with mostly was, from what I've heard, Leszek Kolakowski, one of the most important Polish intellectuals of the 20th century, I think one may say so. But then he's not only a man of government, he has been a successful journalist for quite a number of years, and he has come around in very dangerous areas. In Afghanistan, from what I've read, in Angola, working as a correspondent for The Spectator and The Observer in Britain. So you have quite some field experience, which obviously is not the case in many cases of other foreign ministers. I suppose it has shaped your view on the world. And then he has one other specific aspect to his curriculum, which I found important. You interviewed for the Sunday's Telegraph a large number of important politicians over the years. From Lech Walesa, whom you obviously know personally, to Margaret Thatcher, to Kissinger or Václav Klaus, a large number of people you discussed with. So I think you probably should sit in my place and not vice versa. But I'll try my best and you tell me later how it was for you. Well, coming to our topic in the afternoon, we're supposed to discuss the future of European foreign and security policy. And the first question I would want to ask you is, how do you see the geopolitical position of the European Union today? If we look back at 2004, when the big enlargement happened and the Central and Eastern European countries like Poland joined the European Union, the Union seemed to be surrounded by stability and by friends. And what is the difference in relation to 10 years ago today?
Well, I'd love to address the issue, but let me first congratulate you on scoring 0-0 with Poland in Paris. It was a good effort, but this time Lewandowski was on our side, you see.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, we would like to have him in our team.
Yes, I mean, this... for 25 years, it looked like we were perfectly safe in consuming the peace dividend.
Yep.
Everybody, except a few countries like Poland, cut their defense budgets, and we seem to be in a Kantian era of perpetual peace.
Yep.
And we thought we had all the time in the world, and that Europe will forever be a magnet for an example for others to follow.
Yep.
Well, unfortunately, history has caught up with us in both neighborhoods, in the south and in the east. And it turns out that there are still bad people out there, and we still need to protect ourselves. Which is partly why I've been such a strong supporter of Europe's foreign and defense policy. And I hope and insist that we should fulfill what we have signed up to in the Lisbon Treaty. This is not a new idea, it's the law.
It's what everybody has signed in the Lisbon Treaty.
It's in the treaty. And the treaty also says that we should actually be launching a permanent structured cooperation in the area of defense.
Yeah, exactly.
And we should be doing it in the light of practical experience in the last decade. If you look at the big picture, Iraq proves that just being a lieutenant to the United States is not always the best policy. Libya where actually Germany and Poland were skeptical.
Skeptical and hesitant.
My German colleague and friend Guido Westerwelle was heavily criticized in Germany for
not participating,
for abstaining at the UN about the operation. He was vindicated, and I'm very sorry that he's no longer with us. And then, of course, in Syria, we are helplessly watching the tragedy unfolding there. And what Russia is doing in Ukraine also shows you that we need unity, because President Putin is himself pursuing an integration project with Kazakhstan, with Belarus. He would like to have Ukraine in it.
Perhaps
but dealing with us, he would like to deal one by one.
One by one. Perhaps we can come to this later a little bit more in detail. I just want to stay a little bit on the global side. I mean, would you agree that Europe today is the international actor who has most chaos in its strategic neighborhood? And what about the American friends and China, for example, in this respect?
Well, look, the numbers are cannot be overcome. 100 years ago, we were a quarter of the world's population. Today, we are 7-8%, right? And the trend are only going to get worse. So the question is, can we construct an international order in which we would still have the most influence on the rule making? And I would put to you that we can do that only in partnership with other democracies, such as the United States and Japan. But for us to get a good deal out of that relationship, we have to act in unison as Europe as a whole.
But then what's the weakness of the West lately? I mean, if you advocate that we can only do it together, where are the weak points from your point of view? Because we have lost significant influence, and the American policy, especially in the Middle East, has produced part of the problems we are facing today.
I would say that our problem is that we don't do what we say. We pledge ourselves to have for example, a joint foreign policy, and then member states do their own thing anyway. We declare something is a red line, and it doesn't happen. We say we will help the democracies of Northern Africa, and then it takes years to actually do anything. To me, it's an issue of governability, of management. People need to see that Europe is capable of acting, of making a difference.
Yeah, okay. And how do you do that? I mean, in Brussels, Mrs. Mogherini is trying to shape a new global strategy. What would be your take on it? I mean, what should be stressed in this new European global strategy to be able to act?
Well, she's trying to write a global strategy, and I wonder how many people will then read the document. We have the previous global strategy, which is unknown to most people. Global strategy is what your capabilities are and what you do.
What you do.
I mean, for example, we have a beautifully written EU strategy towards Russia, actually adopted under the previous German presidency under Chancellor Schröder. If only it were acted upon, it would be fine.
I mean, this is the thing, maybe we can come a little bit more to the regional conflicts. You were personally strongly involved in Ukraine, in Maidan. You always favored the Weimar Triangle, the cooperation between France, Germany, and Poland. But then at the end of the day, we are now facing a situation where the Minsk agreement is not being lived up to, and we have a new format, the Normandy format, which is a format in which the nation states, the big nation states, are the drivers. What's your take on that?
Well, the Minsk agreement was agreed under the Normandy format, and I think it's a mistake. I think there was nothing wrong with meeting in Normandy. One does diplomacy at funerals, one does diplomacy at such occasions. But I think then member states of the EU should tell Mr. Putin, and by the way, we are by treaty obliged to hand over this negotiation to the people whom we've appointed to do the job.
Which means on the Brussels.
Which means the High Representative. And then I think the High Representative could be, in fact, more effective
But isn't it exactly the other way around, that the big nation states go ahead, and then they at least inform Mrs. Mogherini and let her take part?
Yeah, and then we are surprised that we are not effective.
That we are not effective. But I mean, this is a matter which has to be decided in the Council. So if
the big member states have to take a step back and allow the institutions to do their work. We need to respect what has been agreed.
Yeah, but this seems to be a general problem for the European institutions, because the national leaders in the Council very often do not live up to what they have signed.
No. And also the normal political method is to come to a sensible agreement in Brussels and then walk out and say that I've defeated the foreigners, I've got the best deal for my own country, and nobody speaks for Europe as a whole. And then we are surprised.
The best deal for Europe.
Then we are surprised that only 38% or 39% of the people are supporting the European Union, and Brexit is one of the consequences of this style of doing politics.
So you say if one would have been a lot more active and proactive, outspoken in favor of joint solutions, we wouldn't have the same problems with populists and with Euro-critical positions.
But to be fair, we tried to do that. We tried to have a union with the popular legitimacy in a constitution. And that was defeated in frivolous referenda about something else, irresponsibly called in West European countries.
In West European countries, I know. Yeah. So I'm coming back once again to the neighborhood policy of the European Union. Maybe we look at it first more in the East, because that's where you're from and you have acted on actively. What do you think about the situation at the moment? Russia is also trying to put up an own economic bloc, which in my opinion looks quite weak. But do you think the European Union should proceed with its policy, with trade agreements? What do you think should the EU do in the neighborhood countries?
Well, first of all, let me just mention that Poland's policy towards its east is the same as Germany's. You know, we would like to have democratic neighbors on both sides of our borders. We would like them to prosper because we would like to trade with them and so on. And that includes Russia. And people now misremember about Eastern Partnership, of which I was one of the authors. The only reason Russia was not in Eastern Partnership, Russia was invited. That Russia excluded herself from Europe's neighborhood policy. And
because they wanted an exclusive treatment.
Because they're so big and they want an exclusive agreement. And we said, yes, all right, you are a strategic partner. And therefore we propose to you a parallel process called Partnership and Cooperation Agreement. So what was meant to happen was more free trade with Russia and more free trade with the other neighbors, in parallel. And that made perfect sense. And it was Russia that stopped the negotiations on the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement. Well, that's Russia's choice.
What do you think in general concerning Russia's position at the moment? Because the sanctions are in place still, EU sanctions are in place. Obviously, Russia doesn't talk too much about the sanctions apart from saying they are not effective, which I doubt, because I think they do have an effect on the economy, and Putin is losing middle-class people who have traditionally supported him. What's your take on that? I mean, what should the EU do to get going with Russia again?
Well, when I was in the Polish government, we tried to reconcile with Russia, and actually there were some successes. President Putin came to the Katyn, the Katyn site of the massacre of Polish officers. He came to to Gdańsk on the anniversary of the war. There was some progress, but when he carries out an Anschluss of another country's province, and then invades the country on a completely spurious pretext of protecting people who didn't ask for to be protected. Well, we've seen that movie before, and we know how it ends, and we can't tolerate it in Europe.
But are you skeptical concerning the situation in Ukraine? I mean, what do you think about Crimea. I think I've read lately that you advocate Crimea to be left out of the...
No, all I'm saying is that I can't imagine that while President Putin is in power, he will give it back.
Okay.
And I also think that Donbass is an economic cost to him.
To him, of course.
Whereas Ukraine has started to reform itself. They've reformed the gas market, which was very important. It was a huge drag on their economy, 7% of GDP. And I believe their first priority now should be fighting corruption. And from what I hear from international institutions, this year, Russia will stagnate the economy, whereas Ukraine will start to grow.
Will start to grow. Okay.
Good.
And what about Georgia and the Moldova, for example? Also big problem, very unstable.
Yes, I mean, you know, someone very cleverly did a banking scam in Moldova. But Moldova introduced many reforms, so much so that we were able to certify that several dozen conditions that you need to fulfill to get a visa-free agreement have been fulfilled. Moldovans can now travel to Europe without visas. That means the Moldovan passport also, in relation to their frozen conflict, is now more valuable. Good. That's an encouragement to reform. Excellent. Under Eastern Partnership, we now have deep and comprehensive free trade agreements with 3 countries, Georgia, which means Ukraine, that 3 countries are leaving the post-Soviet legal civilization and applying acquis communautaire.
But isn't that precisely what the Russians are afraid of?
Well, if you think that becoming a democracy, a law-abiding state is a threat, and some people in Moscow do see it as a threat, we can't help that. I would grant them that the process of European rapprochement and European association is a threat to kleptocracy, to dictatorship. It is an ideological threat.
It's an ideological threat, yeah. And what about NATO in this picture? I mean, there's the summit in Warsaw, and we have NATO maneuvers going on in
President
Poland.
Putin has certainly rejuvenated NATO, we are sure of that, because he has scared us all by his unpredictability. And so finally NATO is beginning to do what we've advocated for years, namely equalizing the infrastructure and the physical security of all its members.
But would you see then Poland as a leading country in Central and Eastern Europe taking the Baltics on board and maybe some others in a stronger plea for European defense also in Central Europe?
Well, that was certainly the policy of our government, and we even fielded during the Polish presidency a letter of 5 asking for a permanent structured cooperation in defense. And if Britain leaves, Britain vetoed it, but if Britain leaves, that's an idea that perhaps is worth revisiting. I think there will increasingly be situations in which the United States is involved in the Middle East or in the Far East, and Europe should be able to protect its own neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, that's a general tendency. I think we as Europeans can't count on the Americans in every case any longer.
And they are encouraging us to get our act together.
Yeah, that is an experience we also have made in Washington, that they are they are a lot more open to more union in European defense than 15 years ago, because they see it as complementary, possibly complementary.
But if we were to do it, the object would be to avoid some of the mistakes in the rules that govern NATO. So, for example, I would put the bar quite high, namely, countries could only join if they really spent 2% of their GDP on defense. Countries could only join. This would be difficult for Germany.
Yeah, for Germany, it would be really difficult.
But not only that. If you devote your troops to an operation they would have to have unified rules of engagement.
Yeah, of course.
Because when you have different rules of engagement,
That's difficult for a parliamentary army like ours, as you know.
Right, right.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, maybe a last question concerning then the future of the conflict in Ukraine. Do you expect that we will have a frozen conflict like in Cyprus for a couple of decades, and that it is partly a matter of Putin being in power, and if other leaders come...
We will have a frozen conflict there as long as Mr. Putin wants there to be a frozen conflict. By the Minsk agreement, he should have restored... We are asking a very reasonable thing, namely that on the 1st of January this year, he should have restored the international border between Ukraine and Russia, to the control of the of
OSCE.
No, of Ukraine.
Of Ukraine.
Of Ukraine, and he hasn't done it, and it's entirely up to him. We have now observed that he can switch this conflict on and off, as he sees fit.
As he sees fit. Okay, that's not very encouraging. So one will have to think about another strategy in relation to Russia. I mean, before we come to questions from the general public coming in here, I was going to ask you still about the role of Germany in the European foreign policy. I mean, you've had that famous speech where you said that an acting Germany, you would rather prefer a strong Germany to a non-acting Germany, which was cited, as you know, on all sides very frequently. So how do you see...
And in the next sentence I said, and Poland will support you if you consult.
If you consult, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that might be the problem then. In any case, what do you think about Germany's role in these turbulent times?
Well, you are the biggest shareholder in this business, depending how you count, whether by population or by the economy, between 20 and 25% of shareholding, which means that you have the biggest responsibility for it to save it and also to make it prosper. And you are also the biggest beneficiary, also of the euro.
Yeah, that's probably a thing our government should have told more often to our citizens.
But I believe leadership is something best exercised and not talked about. And it's best to exercise it in a way that others can accept. And the way others can accept in the European context is through the EU institutions.
Yeah, but that would also mean, I mean, you already indicated it, consultation, permanent consultation, transparency and information would be crucial elements then.
Absolutely, and also when you have confederal arrangements, such as the Eurozone and the Schengen zone, never commit the mistake of thinking that they are anybody's property, and that you can make unilateral decisions, because they are the ownership of their members.
I mean, coming a little bit then to Poland's role, or perhaps to Poland's new role, I mean, we were pretty sure that in times you were in government, in the Tusk governments, and even in the previous governments, Poland was coming closer and closer to the European Union. Poland certainly has gotten a very positive image in Brussels, in the European institutions, for the professionalism of the people you have sent and for the European conviction they brought with them. Yeah? But the new government is a different government. So what can be Poland's role with this new government in the European Union?
I have a policy not to discuss Polish politics abroad. Let me just say I didn't vote for this government, okay?
Yeah. All right. I will not really press you on that, but I can assure you that we feel it in Brussels already, that things are different, and we have to see how...
There is a wave of nationalism sweeping not just Europe, also the United States. And I think nationalists are harmful to the national interest, because the world is not a Hobbesian struggle of dog eat dog. We actually there are such situations, the zero-sum game situations, but actually it's more constructive to look for
win-win situations.
For win-win situations, and they are more common than the other ones. So I think it's a sort of philosophical mistake.
Okay, so let me look at things coming from the outside briefly. There's one question I would pass on to you that is directly concerning the EU army. How realistic is it, and does an EU army make sense in your
No, I think
perception?
EU army is a red herring. What we do have is European battle groups. Actually, a British concept originally, I understand. And we've had successive countries being framework nations, militaries organizing staffs and rotations and alerts and so on. And we haven't yet used it once.
Now, that's one of the other questions coming in concerning the battle groups.
Oh, well, I could imagine using it.
Yeah.
I can look.
What's the reason? Why is it not used? Why has it not been used?
Because the use of armies abroad is almost always unpopular, and politicians don't want to risk it because you get casualties, it's expensive, and so on. But I think the agreement with Turkey shows many things, but also tactically one thing, namely that to really solve a migration crisis, you need to control the other side of the river.
Of course,
right?
Northern Africa.
So I think there are some lessons, some suggestions in this for Libya. And, we can't escape responsibility for destabilizing Libya.
I agree.
And if a Libyan government asked us to help them against those smugglers who are responsible for the deaths of all those poor people, I think we should help them.
Okay, another question coming in, totally different perspective. It is about Frank-Walter Steinmeier's commentary or criticism in regard to the NATO maneuvers in Poland. Do you understand his position?
Frank-Walter is an old friend, so please excuse me from answering.
Yeah, but I mean, from what I have read about your policy, you would be rather in favor of a clear position.
Frank-Walter is concerned that we shouldn't provoke Russia. And I agree, we shouldn't needlessly provoke Russia. But we also need to convince Mr. Putin that NATO area is out of bounds. And what is being decided, 1 battalion per country. You can't invade Russia with 1 battalion. So Russia has absolutely no reason to feel alarmed by this.
Yeah, I have one other question here. Let me see. Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, an interesting thing which leaves the military side a little bit apart. I mean, somebody's asking here, Sandra is asking a couple of minutes ago, if the European Union can't offer the carrot any longer of becoming a member, what will be the motivation for countries in Central and Eastern Europe or in the Caucasus to stick to our offer of democracy and market economy?
Very good question. I mean, we don't have a official policy of no enlargement ever in future. And personally, I think the Treaty of Rome should be respected, in which we said that any European country can join. And my definition of a European country is a country whose majority territory is in Europe. But of course, in times of crisis, we are less generous. And so these things have slowed down. But the process of being a candidate, it is humiliating because you are accepting from outside the laws and rules and so on. But in the end, it's good for you because it's a sort of shortcut to solutions, legal solutions and institutional solutions that work.
Yeah, and that was how it has worked with many countries before. So I think in the case of Serbia, for example, it could work.
The real challenge is to align the incentive that is long-term with the electoral cycle.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is hard.
Yeah, which is hard because normally, I mean, that's another thing I think you could comment on. My impression was always in the transition of the 90s, many of the populations in the Central and Eastern European countries thought that political freedom would automatically go along with well-being and growth on the economic side. and then they've seen that a capitalist economy
some people may have thought
does not produce necessarily both
some people
things
may
at
have
the same
thought
time.
that, but if you remember, we carried out our shock therapy in Poland in 1990. As a result, our post-communist recession was shallowest and shortest, and it actually commanded quite a lot of support because we had a national consensus that we were going to become a normal country, and our definition of a normal country was a Western country, and we were prepared to eat grass to get there. When you have countries that were under communism or inside the Soviet Union for far longer, that determination, that clarity is less.
It's less. Yeah, but I mean, if you look back at the 25 years of transition, Poland certainly is one of the countries best off. Not all of the countries have reached the level of growth.
When communism collapsed, we were the poorest in relation to Western Europe, in our 1,000-year history.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And we have, in the 25 years, caught up at the fastest rate in our history. We were at 35% of GDP per head of Western Europe. We are now close to 70%.
To 70%, yeah, that's quite successful, obviously.
And yet, many people are dissatisfied.
Yeah, I mean, that's another question we already briefly discussed. I mean, to some extent, I think the populisms we are experiencing in Central and Eastern Europe, I would term it a little bit the revenge of the losers of transition. Do you see it in the same way?
No, because as I say, in Poland we have had continuous growth for 25 years. We're not a post-recession country because we didn't have a recession.
But that's different in Hungary, for example.
But they had theirs earlier on under a socialist government. No, I think this is a reaction more to globalization and integration and people's threatened sense of identity, threatened sense of control. The union level is very complicated.
Yeah, it's really
as a
multi-level system.
As a politician doing it, you have to learn how it works.
But then you also say that there is a lot more to people's identity than only their money in the pocket.
We human beings are not entirely rational beings, and we know this from our history.
So that's what we see with populism right now.
We have a tsunami of irrationality sweeping the entire West, from Eastern Europe all the way to the west coast of the United States.
Okay, having touched on the US, there's one question coming in from Christoph Krobert. He wants to know about your position on TTIP. Do you think it is an agreement the European Union can benefit from? And would you be in favor, or do you also acknowledge the many critical points in it, and how do you see the future of TTIP?
Well, let's remember why we have the TTIP negotiations. We have them because the Doha round of global free trade failed. And with the United States, I would say this is our only chance to create a set of rules that would be the dominant rules in the world. If we miss this, the next big idea will be probably us having to negotiate with China the global rules. And so for the sake of this strategic idea, in my view, it is worth making some compromises. Doha round failed because of the issue of the means of cleaning dead chickens. Americans clean their chickens with some chemical we don't like. I hope this doesn't fail for equally trivial reasons.
Yeah, all right. Having talked about TTIP as being a big joint project between Europe and the United States, how do you think Europe should shape its relation to the US in the future, once we've already noticed that America is a little bit more isolationist, and that America is looking a little bit more towards the Pacific than in the last decades when it was more looking towards Europe. So what do you think about the policy the EU should have towards the US?
Well, my favorite solution would be for the United States to apply to join the European Union. But we could adopt the US Constitution. Here's a big idea. Here's a big idea. But seriously speaking, the United States is an essential ally, and we can now see that actually they need us even more than they appreciated. Europe is an anchor for liberal democratic policies inside the United States as well, because it's turned out that these values are actually not as widespread on both sides of the Atlantic as we were assuming for many years.
Yeah, that might be a real problem because if we look back at the early 90s, when Fukuyama wrote his article of the end of history, many people thought that was the definite answer to ideological conflict. And now we regrettably see that it's not the case.
And let's look, the United States is becoming more social democratic.
Yeah,
they've introduced universal health care. We could do with a little bit more competition in our economy.
Not only that, Sanders' success in the primaries is amazing. I mean, in the early 50s, he would probably have been persecuted by McCarthy's people.
He wasn't a Soviet spy. I don't think he was a Soviet spy.
No, he was not a Soviet spy, but he has socialist ideas of traditional social democratic connotation.
Yeah, but we could do with some of the innovation and the productivity at which the Americans are better than us, actually.
Okay, all right. Well, if I look at the questions coming in from the general public, it's a lot more, again, on Ukraine and Polish politics. So, I don't know, let me see if there is anything new to what we've already discussed. Yeah, maybe there's one question from Petra. She's asking about the sanctions. We briefly touched on it. But do you think the EU will be able to maintain the sanctions? There are tendencies inside the EU, and not all countries share the same view on sanctions. Okay, I think we're supposed to close. So thank you. Yeah, all right.